The plane taxied towards the runway, and Marcus, with calculated coldness, examined the sealed package. But inside, a slow fire of understanding began to burn. This was not just about poor service or a simple oversight. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. He opened his messaging app again and, after reflecting, sent another message to Jessica. Please, contact Diane immediately. I want to know if there have been other complaints from minority passengers in first class during the last quarter. Also, remind me when we installed the surveillance system in the premium cabins. The response came quickly. The system was implemented 3 months ago across the entire fleet, and the images are stored for 30 days. Should I be worried? Marcus watched as Claire and another flight attendant disappeared behind the curtain of the galley, their muffled laughter echoing as they returned to the aisle. He hadn't written anything yet, but stay close to your phone, you might need to make some calls before landing. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Marcus felt the familiar pressure in his chest as it soared towards the clouds. What was supposed to be the start of a pleasant 6-hour flight was quickly turning into something very different, a test of patience, professionalism, and principles with potential repercussions. But what he would discover in the air would change everything. With the skill of someone accustomed to the most subtle protocol changes, he accepted the towel with a polite gesture. He nodded courteously as Claire approached the passenger seated behind him. Her voice immediately brightened as she offered champagne and a warm welcome. Marcus, then, refocused his attention on his tablet, reviewing the customer satisfaction metrics that he himself had promoted as essential indicators of the airline's performance. He couldn't help but perceive the irony as he waited for his pre-takeoff drink, which he had specifically requested when booking his ticket. 10 minutes passed as the other first-class passengers received their drinks, including a middle-aged couple who had boarded just behind Marcus and were now enjoying glasses brimming with sparkling champagne. Marcus closed his tablet and pressed the call button. His finger hesitated briefly, weighing whether this small battle was worth it. With a silent exhale, he pressed it resolutely. Claire approached again, her expression tense. Yes, sir, I believe I'm still waiting for my pre-takeoff drink, Marcus declared calmly and professionally. I pre-ordered the Malin 18 when I purchased my ticket. Claire responded with a glance that shifted towards the galley. I don't see that in our system, she remarked, and added, we're running out of premium drinks for this flight. I can offer you orange juice. But what Marcus did next left everyone stunned. 3 years ago, Marcus secretly co-founded Elite Airways, an airline in which he held a stake through a hidden investment firm. Good afternoon, said a flight attendant to the silver-haired gentleman across the aisle, with a warm and welcoming voice. Welcome aboard, Mr. Whitman. Would you like a glass of our exclusive champagne before takeoff? Marcus, without losing focus, continued to review the impressive revenue figures on his screen. Under his shrewd leadership, Elite Airways had achieved a 15% increase in the premium travel segment. Few within the company knew of his involvement beyond the boardroom, and he preferred it that way. Experiencing the airline like any other customer and picking up details that quarterly reports and surveys couldn't capture. Claire, the flight attendant, moved skillfully through the cabin. She handed out warm towels and champagne glasses to the passengers in the front rows, her warm smile shining like a beacon. However, Marcus noticed that smile slightly fading as she approached his seat. Her eyes briefly rested on his dark complexion before fixing just above his shoulder. Towel? Claire asked, with a noticeably colder tone than she used with the other passengers. Yes, thank you, Marcus replied, intrigued by the change. But what happened next left him bewildered. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your expectations are unexpectedly challenged? Marcus. He experienced it when he looked over his shoulder and saw a fully stocked bar, ready for an unusual service. He had received a confirmation email detailing his drink preferences. Mentioning it, he pulled up the email on his tablet and showed it to Claire, perhaps to make sure everything was in order. Claire, with an increasingly curt tone, replied that the system sometimes oversold certain products and that today's supplies were limited. Without waiting for a response, she turned around to fetch some orange juice. Marcus watched as she whispered something to another flight attendant who returned a barely contained smile. Taking a deep breath, Marcus returned to his tablet, opening the communication app he used to stay in touch with his executive assistant, Jessica. He sent her a brief message about the curious discrepancies in the service of Elite Flight 347. Maybe it's just a detail to discuss with Diane in Human Resources upon my return, he thought. Just then, the captain's voice echoed through the intercom announcing the imminent takeoff and thanking the passengers for choosing Elite Airways. Marcus straightened his seat and stowed the tablet, as Claire distributed warm mixed nuts to nearby passengers. When she reached his row, she left a small package of pretzels on his tray. However, what would happen next would completely change the course of his flight. He wasn't just unlucky. Something deliberately malicious had carefully replaced the bread and pushed the plate aside, his appetite completely annihilated. What he discovered next left him speechless. "Everything is fine with your meal, sir," Michael said again, his voice tinged with a hint of mockery that did not go unnoticed by nearby passengers. "It's not," Marcus replied firmly, pointing at the sandwich. "There is visible mold on this bread. I want to speak to the captain about this situation." Michael leaned in closer, examining the sandwich with exaggerated scrutiny. "I don't see anything unusual, maybe you're mistaken." "I assure you I'm not," Marcus retorted, maintaining his composure despite the escalating provocation. "This bread is clearly spoiled, and I want to know why I was served it when everyone else received fresh, high-quality meals." Claire appeared beside Michael, her face flushed with what seemed to be irritation, not embarrassment. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. "Yes, there is," Marcus replied, turning his attention to Claire. "I was served moldy bread while everyone around me is enjoying their premium meals. I have repeatedly asked for an explanation, and so far I have only received excuses and evasions." Claire's eyes narrowed for a moment, something darker than mere annoyance crossed her features. "Sir, if you don't like what we have served, you can choose not to eat it, but I will not allow you to disrupt this flight." Have you ever received such poor service that you felt compelled to act? That's how Marcus Reynolds' flight began, when a moldy sandwich landed on his first-class tray with deliberate disdain. Claire Wilson, a smile of satisfaction on her lips, watched on. Marcus, a distinguished CEO, maintained a calm expression as he discreetly activated the airline's surveillance system, a resource he had approved as a co-owner of Elite Airways. Behind the curtain, Claire's whispers about how certain people shouldn't be in first class were accurately recorded. Every word cemented her fate as Marcus meticulously documented the treatment he received with patient precision. His silence, loaded with intent, was more threatening than any direct confrontation. It wasn't rage that drove him, but a resolute calm that would turn this flight into Claire's most devastating miscalculation of her career. As he pressed the call button once more, the message was clear. Marcus adjusted his tailored suit and settled into Seat 2A on Elite Airways Flight 347 to San Francisco. The supple leather seat enveloped him in the familiar comfort he was accustomed to after years of frequent travel. A small luxury he allowed himself after 2 decades of building Reynolds Technologies from the ground up. As the other passengers boarded, Marcus took out his tablet and opened an email. Marcus watched as the kitchen curtain closed behind the flight attendant, leaving him facing an unappetizing meal. He remained still, weighing his options. His years navigating the American corporate world as an African-American executive had taught him the importance of choosing his battles wisely. But this time, he decided it was worth fighting, not just for himself, but for the other 17 who had filed complaints and perhaps for dozens more who had simply accepted mistreatment as an unavoidable reality. He pressed the call button again, waiting patiently as minutes passed without a response, until another flight attendant approached. He was a young man whose name tag read, Michael. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, though his tone hinted that helping was the last thing on his wish list. "Yes," Marcus responded, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I would like to speak with the purser or the head flight attendant about an issue with my meal service." Michael's clear eyes narrowed slightly. "I am in charge of this section." "What seems to be the problem?" he inquired. "I pre-ordered a meal that was not provided to me, and instead, I received what appears to be an economy class option," explained Marcus, aware that several passengers were now watching openly the interaction. "When I inquired about it, they told me that certain passengers were offered an alternative. But what happened next was incredible." He spotted them huddled together with a third crew member, the 3 occasionally casting furtive glances in their direction. Marcus picked up his phone once more and accessed his email to find Diane's direct contact information. As he drafted a message detailing the current situation, Chen, Elite Airways Human Resources Chief, felt a presence beside him. Looking up, he met Mr. Whitman, silver-haired, standing there, holding his half-eaten salmon plate. He couldn't help but overhear. Whitman whispered, "I've flown this route for 15 years and never witnessed anything like this. This isn't right." He paused, carefully weighing his next words. "Do you want me to say something?" Marcus thanked him for the gesture but shook his head slightly. "Thank you, but I can handle it." He returned his focus to his phone and added another paragraph to the email as the crew members continued their hushed conversation behind the curtain, unaware of the quiet documentation taking place and the storm brewing on the digital horizon. Marcus set his phone down and cautiously eyed the sandwich in front of him. The edges of the bread had an unmistakable greenish tint that grew more pronounced as he lifted, gently slicing through the top layer. Dark patches of mold speckled the bottom, confirming what his instincts had already warned him about. Claire maintained her carefully neutral expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have no record of that order. We are serving what is available." "That's interesting," replied Marcus as he pulled out his phone to show the confirmation email. "Because here I have the confirmation along with your system's acknowledgement of my dietary preferences and meal selection." Claire barely glanced at the screen. "As I mentioned earlier about your drink, our system sometimes oversells certain items. There simply aren't enough premium meals for everyone today." A passenger across the aisle, Whitman, looked up from his fork, suspended in the air with a piece of salmon, following the exchange with barely concealed interest. Marcus noticed, but kept his focus on Claire. "I see many premium meals being served," he observed, discreetly pointing to the passengers around him. "Perhaps you could explain why I am the only one in first class receiving what seems to be an economy meal." She smiled more, "Sir. We must prioritize certain guests based on their status and loyalty program. I assure you, this is standard procedure." "I am a Platinum Elite member," Marcus asserted firmly. "I have flown over 200,000 miles with this airline alone during the past year. I'll consult with my supervisor," Claire replied in a tone that hinted she had no intention of doing so. But what happened next could change everything. Why do some passengers receive special treatment while others are ignored? This is what Marcus wondered as the disparity in service became more evident. Mid-flight, Michael, with a condescending tone, remarked that sometimes adjustments need to be made in service. "Claire must have explained this to you," he said. "We can't fulfill all special requests." Marcus, calmly but steadily, noted down Michael's badge number as he nodded. "I understand the adjustments," Marcus replied, "but I don't understand why everyone around me received the premium meal I ordered, while I had this." He raised a sandwich that was starting to curl and dry at the edges. "Could you explain the criteria for these adjustments?" Michael's posture tensed. "Sir, I'll ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the other passengers." However, Marcus maintained a calm tone, aware that the real disturbance was the disparity in service. A silent tension took over the first-class cabin. Some passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others watched with evident curiosity. "I haven't raised my voice," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm just asking for an explanation for this service discrepancy." Michael and Claire and Marcus exchanged quick words before she headed to the kitchen, leaving Marcus and the passengers in an uncomfortable silence. But what happened next was even more surprising. For some, the hours of flight seemed endless. He tucked the tablet into his jacket pocket just as Claire approached with the food cart. Her perfectly rehearsed smile reappeared as she served the passenger across the aisle. "Mr. Whitman, we have your special order ready. Seared salmon with truffle risotto and a glass of Montrachet." "The chef's compliments," she said, carefully placing the white porcelain plate in front of the silver-haired gentleman. The aroma of gourmet cuisine filled the cabin as Claire continued to attend to each passenger with dedication and care. Marcus watched the ritual and noticed how she leaned in to explain wine pairings to a young couple, how she remembered another passenger's preference for extra bread. When she finally reached his seat, Claire's demeanor subtly changed as she placed a covered plate in front of him, avoiding eye contact. "Your meal," she said firmly, quickly moving away. Marcus lifted the lid and found a dry sandwich on visibly hardened bread, accompanied by a small cup of lukewarm apple juice. The contrast between his meal and the others was striking enough to attract curious glances from the passengers. Close by. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice calm but firm enough to halt Claire in her tracks. "I believe there has been a mistake with my meal. I pre-ordered the chef special when I booked this flight." But what happened next left everyone speechless. What is the secret behind a flight that promises to transform the air travel experience? The seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft sound as the plane reached its cruising altitude, prompting the crew to begin their preparations. Marcus Reynolds briefly closed his eyes, recalling that pivotal board meeting just 3 years ago. It was then that he proposed a bold investment in Elite Airways. His colleagues at Reynolds Technologies had questioned the wisdom of diversifying into the aviation industry. But Marcus saw an opportunity to revolutionize a sector plagued by declining service standards and increasing customer dissatisfaction. The silent partnership had allowed him to observe operations with complete honesty while implementing changes from the very core of decision-making. Jessica's response was revealing. On her tablet screen, the human resources record showed 17 formal complaints from minority passengers in first class over the past year. 5 specifically mentioned flight attendant Claire Wilson. Of those, 3 were dismissed due to lack of evidence and 2 ended. They flew in vouchers for customers, but the surveillance system for disciplinary actions was not yet fully operational on their plane. Diane awaited his call. Marcus acknowledged the message with a quick touch, feeling a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the burden of proof. But what he would discover next would change everything. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Marcus, keeping his voice steady despite the unfounded accusations, pointed firmly towards the sandwich. "The evidence is right here," he said. "I would like to understand why I am being treated this way when I have always been courteous in my requests." "Because some people don't know how to appreciate what they have," Claire murmured, loud enough for Marcus and several nearby passengers to hear. "Always seeking special treatment." The comment hung in the air, its implications as clear as day. An uncomfortable silence took hold of the first class as passengers shifted in their seats, pretending not to hear, though some exchanged knowing glances. Marcus's pulse quickened, but years of experience in similar situations had taught him that losing his cool would only fuel the prejudices that people like Claire clearly held. "I'm not seeking special treatment," Marcus asserted with a firm and controlled voice. "I just want equality. The same food options, the same service, and the same respect that any other first-class passenger deserves." Dropping his professional facade, he leaned towards Marcus and whispered in a frosty tone. "Listen, I don't know how you ended up in this cabin, but we both know you don't belong here, so why don't you just sit quietly and please?" The kitchen curtain opened again, and Captain Hoffman himself emerged with a stern face, inspecting the place. His gaze fixed on Marcus with unmistakable hostility. "Sir," the captain began with a voice carrying the weight of authority. "I understand you are causing a disturbance, and I must inform you that if this behavior persists, I will be forced to divert the flight for the safety of all passengers." The threat hung in the air as Marcus, with calculated calm, reached for his tablet and opened his executive email with deliberate movements. "Captain Hoffman, I suggest you reconsider that action. I have not caused any disturbance. As numerous passengers in this cabin can attest, all I have done is inquire why I have been singled out for poor service and disrespectful treatment." The captain's expression darkened. "Sir, as the commander of this aircraft, my determination of what constitutes a disturbance is final. I give you one last chance to comply with the crew's instructions and put an end to this disruptive behavior." "What specific instruction have I not complied with?" Marcus asked, his finger hovering over the send button on an email addressed to the board of directors. "Airline directive," a message that would reach their phones long before the plane landed at any airport. Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the curtains of a flight? The head of the crew, identified by the badge on his uniform as Mr. Reynolds, began with a professionally neutral tone, but with a palpable tension. "I understand there has been some confusion with your meal. I want to assure you that we take all our passengers' concerns very seriously." "Thank you," Marcus replied, clearly sensing the strategic use of his name. Someone had finally checked the passenger manifest. He explained to his colleagues that he had pre-booked a meal, which was not delivered to him, and instead received food that appeared to be in poor condition. The flight attendant nodded with a carefully controlled expression. We are looking into the situation. In the meantime, I can offer you a selection from our business class menu, if that is acceptable to you. That's what I find intriguing, Marcus replied, ignoring the discounted offer. His colleague suggested that this treatment was intentional, with quite specific objectives in mind. The flight attendant's professional veneer showed a crack. I am certain there has been a misunderstanding. Claire, one of our most experienced flight attendants. Experience does not exclude prejudice, Marcus observed calmly, aware that nearby passengers were still listening intently. Exchange. In fact, sometimes it just provides more opportunities to act accordingly. Suddenly, the intercom came to life with the captain's voice. As Marcus navigated through his increasingly limited options, Claire disappeared behind the kitchen curtain. Urgent whispers faintly reached the cockpit, but Marcus kept his gaze fixed on the captain, allowing the weight of the moment to settle between them. The confrontation had reached its climax. To retreat now would only strengthen the behavior he had witnessed, not only on this flight, but throughout the airline. The responsibility to act weighed heavily on his shoulders, a burden he had carried throughout his career, navigating with a calculated calm through spaces never designed for people like him. Marcus pressed send on the email he had drafted to the board of directors, detailing the discriminatory treatment he had endured and requesting an immediate review of the plane's surveillance footage. The silent confirmation beep echoed in the tense silence of the cockpit. I have just contacted the airline's executive team, announced Marcus, his voice cutting clearly through the silent space. I have requested that they review the surveillance footage of this flight, which I believe will provide conclusive evidence of the treatment I have received. I have also asked them to prepare for the possibility that I may be able to divert this flight without legitimate cause. The captain's expression darkened at the direct challenge to his authority. Have you ever felt the tension in the air, as if a secret were about to burst? Claire Michael suddenly experienced it as several passengers pointed their phones at her. That's enough, she said, suggesting they continue the discussion in the galley. As the two flight attendants slipped behind the curtain, Marcus let out a deep sigh. Claire's bias had clearly emerged, revealing her true intentions. Marcus picked up his phone again. This time, he accessed the exclusive Elite Airways Executive app, a secure digital haven only for top management and key stakeholders. With a few taps, he activated the live stream of the cockpit surveillance system, confirming that the cameras were recording everything. Behind the curtain, the raised voices of the flight attendants filtered into the cabin, despite their attempts to keep the conversation private. I can't believe it, exclaimed Claire, her voice clear amidst the plane's hum. He probably used some diversity program to move up here, she said, acting as if she were the owner. Marcus hesitated, his finger hovering over the messages icon, debating whether to alert Diane immediately or let the situation unfold a bit more. His decision was made for him when the galley curtain opened and a third crew member entered. Tion emerged. The peace that everyone around him yearned to preserve was the path of least resistance for him. The decisions made in his youth, when building his career seemed more crucial than challenging the subtle humiliations he endured daily, now left a bitter taste in his mouth, more unpleasant than the stale bread they served him. He could defend his position not only for himself, but for all those who had ever been fired, belittled, or dehumanized because of the color of their skin. The surveillance cameras recorded everything. Witnesses watched as the evidence piled up. This transcended beyond a simple meal. It was no longer a matter of accountability in a system designed to evade it. Captain Hoffman finally spoke, his voice imbued with a calm strength that captured attention before making a decision that would affect everyone on the plane. I believe there is something you should know, he began to say, but was interrupted by the captain, whose jaw was tight with barely contained anger. This is my plane, and I will not allow any passenger to undermine the authority of my crew, he said. Marcus nodded slowly, his finger hovering over the send button on his tablet. That is precisely the problem, Captain. You have made a decision based on misinformation. Not once have you asked for my perspective on what is happening, yet you are willing to cause chaos. But what happened next left everyone speechless. The plane had been diverted, and the captain remained silent, perhaps realizing the fragility of his position. In the brief silence, the flight attendant leaned forward and whispered something in his ear, causing a nearly imperceptible change in his expression, A spark of uncertainty flickered in his eyes. This was not simply a matter of following orders. Marcus seized the moment of doubt. It was about demanding a treatment with the basic dignity and service that each passenger in this cabin had paid for. The only interruption had arisen from the discriminatory actions of his team. A headache began to form in Marcus's temples as he kept his gaze fixed on the captain. Neither was willing to back down in what had evolved from a simple service issue to a conflict of principles. Behind them, the cabin had fallen into complete silence, with the collective attention of every passenger focused on the confrontation unfolding before them. The captain's authority loomed over Marcus as the standoff continued, everyone immersed in the unfolding drama. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus evaluated his options, his mind reviewing possible outcomes with the strategic precision that had guided his business decisions for decades. Should he accept the unfair treatment? A diverted flight, hundreds of passengers at stake. The captain's eyes narrowed in warning. Dangerously, sir, this is your final warning. Follow the crew's instructions immediately or I will be forced to declare an emergency and land at the nearest airport. Which instruction do you want me to follow? Marcus asked, maintaining his composure despite the growing tension. So far, I have been ordered to accept spoiled food, to thank for discriminatory treatment, and to remain silent in the face of racial prejudice. Which of these instructions do you consider reasonable or legal? A flicker of doubt crossed the captain's face, quickly replaced by a renewed determination. This is not about race, it's about maintaining order in my cabin. It became a racial issue when your flight attendant decided I didn't belong in first class, Marcus replied with a steady gaze. It turned into a racial issue when I was served spoiled food while everyone around me enjoyed their proper meals. It became a racial issue when a member of your crew made explicit comments about my presence here. Behind the captain, Claire emerged from the cabin with a flushed face, a mix of anger and anxiety, aware that the situation had spiraled out of control. Captain, maybe Mr. Reynolds is right, Mr. M's voice intervened, leaving everyone on edge about what would come next. Have you ever felt trapped in a story that seems to change every second? That's how it all began for Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Cappy. Tan Hoffman. Our flight attendants have informed me of a situation in first class. I remind you to follow the crew's instructions at all times for safety. Any disruptive behavior will be intolerable. The message was clear, and Marcus instantly knew they were pointing at him as the culprit. He looked around, noticing how several passengers were watching him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The narrative was being altered before his eyes, turning his legitimate request for fair treatment into an interruption that justified the captain's intervention. The flight attendant, now more confident due to the captain's implicit support, addressed him, Mr. Reynolds, I must ask you to accept the situation as it is. We are doing everything possible to satisfy everyone. Marcus held the flight attendant's gaze. What exactly has been harmful in my behavior? I have not raised my voice or made demands beyond requesting the service I paid for. I have not ignored any safety instructions. Sir, your questioning of our procedures is creating tension in the cabin, the flight attendant replied, his tone becoming firmer. I will have to ask you to drop the matter. Marcus detected movement in his peripheral vision. Mr. Whitman had stood up from his seat again, approaching, but what happened next left everyone breathless. Have you ever witnessed such a blatant injustice before? Has there ever been a moment that left you speechless? With determined steps, an older gentleman stepped forward and said, Excuse me, addressing the flight attendant. I've been observing the situation, and frankly, your treatment towards this gentleman has been appalling. He has been nothing but polite, and yet he was served moldy food and spoken to condescendingly. The flight attendant turned to Whitman, and his expression immediately softened. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter for the crew to handle. However, Whitman remained unfazed. His voice resonated clearly in the cabin. From where I'm sitting, this looks like blatant discrimination. I've flown with Elite for over 20 years and had never witnessed such poor service or such obvious disrespect towards a passenger. A murmur of agreement arose from several other passengers, and public opinion visibly shifted as people began to connect the dots between Marcus's treatment and the color of his skin. The flight attendant tensed his expression as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. We will bring you some first-class service immediately, Mr. Reynolds, he stated abruptly, turning on his heels to retreat to the galley. "That won't be necessary," Marcus called after her, his voice calm but firm. "What is necessary is an explanation of why I am being treated differently from everyone else in this cabin." The flight attendant stopped, visibly nervous, and he faced a direct challenge to his authority. "Can you imagine discovering that every one of your movements has been captured without your knowledge?" That's exactly what Captain Hoffman faced. Marcus corrected him firmly. The advanced cockpit surveillance system had been installed across the fleet just 3 months ago. Every interaction in this cockpit over the past hour has been recorded and secured on the airline's protected servers, including the conversations that took place behind that curtain. The color drained from Captain Hoffman's face as he grasped the gravity of the situation. Behind the curtain, Marcus could hear Claire's voice rising in panic. The captain's hand clumsily reached for his communication device, but hesitated, unsure of his next move. "Captain," Marcus continued, seizing the moment of confusion, "I know you are at a crossroads. Your crew has provided you with incomplete information, and you are trying to maintain control of your aircraft. However, the facts of this situation are undeniable. They have been witnessed by numerous passengers and recorded by the surveillance system. The question now is how you choose to act." Suddenly, the intercom crackled with the voice of a flight attendant. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We are experiencing some technical difficulties with our originally planned route. The captain will return to the cockpit shortly to assess the situation." But what would happen next would defy all expectations. The atmosphere was tense as Fort Whitman captured everyone's attention. His eyes locked onto the silver-haired passenger who had stood up to stand beside him. "Marcus, I have witnessed the entire interaction, as have many here," he stated, pointing firmly at the flight attendant. The attendant had made openly racist remarks and, worse still, deliberately served spoiled food to this gentleman. "If you choose to divert this flight, it will be solely to punish a passenger who simply asked to be treated with basic human dignity." Murmurs of approval spread through the cabin as other passengers began to show their support. A woman across the aisle raised her phone and declared, "I have recorded parts of this interaction." The attendant had clearly stated that this passenger did not deserve to be in first class, despite his platinum status. Captain Hoffman's authority visibly crumbled as the group of witnesses in the cabin united against the narrative he had upheld. A groan chorus of dissent rose, eroding his position with each passing second. Marcus spoke in a deliberate tone, "Captain, I offer you the opportunity to handle this situation professionally. You can address your crew's discriminatory behavior or you can exacerbate the problem by diverting this flight without justification. This decision, it will have repercussions far beyond the implications floating in the air today." The captain's jaw tightened in an eloquent silence. Have you ever wondered what happens behind the scenes when a flight seems on the brink of chaos? Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until further notice. The message echoed through the plane, but for some, it was a desperate attempt to control a situation rapidly spiraling out of control. Hoffman's expression had drastically shifted from imposing confidence to barely concealed concern. Realizing the grave potential consequences of his decisions, he turned without a word and headed towards the cockpit, leaving the first-class section abuzz with murmurs and inquisitive glances. The flight attendant approached Marcus cautiously, her demeanor having changed drastically in just a few minutes. "Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding. We will bring you a proper business-class meal immediately." But Marcus, with a firm voice, replied, "It's no longer about the meal. It's about confronting a pattern of discriminatory behavior that seems to be tolerated within this airline." The flight attendant, setting aside her professional facade, showed genuine anxiety. "Sir, I assure you that Elite Airways has strict policies against any form of discrimination. This was an isolated incident." "However, Mark," he interrupted, raising his voice with determination. "According to the airline's own records, there were 17 formal complaints from minority passengers in first class just last year. 5 specifically mentioned flight attendant Claire Wilson, and 3 were. But what Marcus would reveal next could change everything. Was it a technical issue with this plane, Captain Hoffman, or was this diversion an attempt to get rid of a passenger who dared to question the moldy food and racial insults?" The question hung in the air, direct and forceful. Several passengers leaned forward in their seats, equally intrigued by the captain's response. The moment lingered as Hoffman visibly weighed his options, none of them appealing. "I made the decision based on the information available at that time," he finally stated, choosing his words carefully to neither admit nor concede anything. "And what specific information was that?" Marcus continued, undeterred by the evasive answer. "Was it a first-class passenger requesting equal treatment, or was it your flight attendant's comment that I didn't belong in this cabin because of my skin color?" A murmur spread through the cabin as passengers reacted to the explicit naming of what many had already suspected. Captain Hoffman's face was tinged with a mix of anger and shame, his authority wavering under the weight of the situation. From their own actions, now exposed to public scrutiny. "This conversation is over," he declared abruptly. "Security will escort you off the plane." As if on cue, the cockpit door swung open, but instead of airport security, a woman in a tailored suit appeared, flanked by. The charges were dismissed due to lack of evidence, and 2 resulted in customer vouchers but not in disciplinary actions. This didn't seem like an isolated incident, but part of a systematic pattern. The flight attendant's eyes widened in astonishment at the precision of the information, details that only someone with access to the airline's internal human resources records could know. She took a step back, suddenly unsure of who she was really dealing with behind the kitchen curtain. Marcus could hear Claire's voice rising with unease. Did she know about the cameras? No one mentioned there were cameras. What else could she know? At that moment, the intercom crackled back to life. Captain Hoffman's voice resonated, tense but imbued with strained professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. After consulting with air traffic control, we have determined that a slight deviation from our route is necessary. We will be landing at Denver International Airport in approximately 50 minutes to address a technical issue. We apologize for any inconvenience and hope to resume our flight shortly. We continue our journey to San Francisco after a brief stop. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." Marcus exhaled slowly, recognizing the maneuver for what it was. An attempt to get him off the plane without directly pointing him out as the problem. The captain was opting for escalation instead of taking responsibility. When the announcement concluded, Marcus opened his messaging app. But what he did next would change the course of events forever. Have you ever wondered how a simple message can trigger a series of events that change everything? Marcus knew it well. He sent a brief but forceful message to Jessica Denver. Landing confirmed, full intervention needed. Contact Diane immediately. I want her team ready at the boarding gate. Full surveillance review. Captain Hoffman is diverting to get me off the flight. The response was immediate. Diane is mobilizing in Denver now. The board has been informed. Expect more updates on him, passengers. Frustration began to bubble as a businessman checked his watch with visible irritation, while a young couple whispered anxiously about their connecting flights. The domino effects of the discrimination Marcus had suffered now spread throughout the plane, affecting the journey of every passenger, a reflection of how unchecked prejudice inevitably harms the whole, not just the intended target. As the plane began its descent towards Denver, Marcus leaned back in his seat, his expression serene despite the storm raging around him and within him. The confrontation had escalated beyond what he had anticipated when he first questioned the quality of the food. But perhaps this was always where these moments were destined to lead. Crossroads where one must choose between submitting to injustice or confronting it firmly, regardless of the consequences. Here is the crucial point. Tension builds in the pursuit of justice. How far would you be willing to go? The air crackled with tension barely masked by the professional tone of the intercom. The cabin crew of the detachment prepared for landing. We will touch down in about 15 minutes. Through the partially open galley curtain, Marcus could observe Claire and Michael engrossed in an urgent conversation. Their faces reflected concern, and Claire's gestures became increasingly frantic as Michael checked his phone. His expression darkened with each passing second, and although Marcus couldn't hear their words over the roar of the descending plane, their body language conveyed growing anxiety. A soft chime from his tablet diverted Marcus's attention to another message on Jessica's surveillance audio. It was a transcription of the GI dispatch, and upon opening automatically, it revealed a conversation that had taken place behind the curtain shortly after her interaction with Captain Claire. I can't believe this is happening. Who does Michael think he is? Claire insisted. I told you, I should have given him the regular meal. Clear, so he can come here and act as if he owns the place. These people need to learn their place. Michael responded cautiously. Lower your voice, you know we shouldn't talk about this, Claire. Everyone thinks they first take care of the coach and now they're moving up to first class. What they discovered later left them breathless. The atmosphere was eerily silent as the passengers awaited further instructions. Tension hung in the recycled air of the plane. Hoffman emerged from the cockpit in his impeccable uniform, but his expression betrayed unease as he made his way down the aisle towards Marcus. Mr. Reynolds, the captain began with a carefully neutral tone. I need to ask you to disembark first. There are representatives waiting to speak with you at the gate. Marcus met the captain's steady gaze. I am aware of that, Captain Hoffman, but before leaving this plane, I would like to understand exactly why we have been diverted. For the record, the captain clenched his jaw almost imperceptibly. I announced that we are dealing with a technical issue. What kind of technical concern would that be? Marcus pressed with a calm yet unwavering voice, something that. A tension that had suddenly emerged after I questioned the discriminatory behavior of their crew. Captain Hoffman looked around at the attentive passengers, clearly uncomfortable with the public challenge to his authority. Sir, this is not the appropriate forum for this discussion. If you have concerns about your treatment, customer service representatives will be happy to assist you at the gate. I believe this is precisely the right time, Marcus replied, gesturing to the cabin surrounding them. These passengers have had their travel plans disrupted and deserve to know if there was indeed an issue. But what Marcus was about to reveal would completely change the situation. Have you ever felt how tension builds around you, almost like a foreboding in the air? The atmosphere in Block 4 of first class was charged, heightening anticipation among the passengers as the plane began its descent towards Denver. Murmurs swept through the area, whispers full of intrigue, as glances were surreptitiously directed towards Marcus, and the flight attendants, avoiding eye contact, moved with an almost robotic efficiency in their landing preparations. Marcus, on his part, maintained his composure, mentally reviewing the events that had led to this unexpected diversion. Each moment was etched in his memory, crystallizing as evidence of what would undoubtedly become a turning point for Elite Airways. His tabletta emitted a soft beep, announcing an incoming message from Jessica. Diane confirmed that the surveillance system was active and recording, while the images were being downloaded for the legal team. The human resources representatives and airport officials were already waiting at Gate B-17 in Denver. Even the CEO was aware, personally overseeing the situation. Marcus nodded slightly in acknowledgement. It was as if the machinery of corporate responsibility, which he himself had helped implement during his 3 years as a silent partner of the airline, was now in motion. He had always believed that real change required both ideal principles and practical mechanisms to enforce them. Today, those mechanisms would face their ultimate test. But what Captain Hoffman was about to announce would change everything. What happens when destiny changes in an instant? Marcus instantly recognized Diane Chen, the head of human resources at Elite Airways, striding purposefully down the aisle. Captain Hoffman, she began with a professional tone that turned icy as she addressed him, security will not be necessary. Mr. Reynolds will not be removed from this flight. Confusion took over the captain's face. Ma'am, he stammered, I have decided that. Your decision has been overturned, Diane interrupted, turning firmly to greet Marcus with a respectful gesture. Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of Elite Airways, I want to express our most sincere apologies. What you experienced today is unacceptable and goes against our core values. The captain's face transformed, shifting from disbelief to anger, and then to a growing understanding as he processed the implications of Diane's presence and her deferential treatment towards the passenger he was trying to remove. Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, I am the commander of this plane and I no longer. Captain, one of the executive officers intervened in a tone that brooked no argument. You and your crew are being relieved of duty pending a thorough investigation. A replacement crew is already boarding through the rear entrance and will complete this flight to San Francisco. But what the investigation revealed changed everything unexpectedly. The captain's face turned pale as he grasped the magnitude of the situation. He glanced at Marcus, who was now reassessing the passenger he had dismissed so easily. The internal struggle to reconcile his presence with the unfolding corporate response was evident. Who, exactly, he asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus held his gaze steady. Years of facing discrimination, both subtle and overt, had prepared him for this moment of recognition. Someone who believed your airline could do better, he replied simply, someone who still does. The first-class cabin fell into absolute silence. Oh, the passengers frozen in their seats, witnessing the dramatic turn of events. Before them, Captain Hoffman remained rigid, his authority stripped in front of everyone. Claire and Michael stood uncertain on the edge of the galley, their expressions wavering between defiance and dismay, while Diane Chen addressed the situation with clinical efficiency. Mr. Barton, Diane called out to the flight attendants, her tone firm yet controlled. Please gather your staff, your belongings, and prepare to disembark immediately. Your credentials have been temporarily suspended pending a full investigation into today's events. She took a step forward, indignation overcoming her surprise. But what happened next was even more shocking. Have you ever wondered how a simple flight diversion can trigger an unexpected chain of events? Marcus, who had been diverted to Denver, seemed surprisingly calm. He watched the elderly man with a cautious smile. Let's just say I've learned to prepare for multiple contingencies in my life, Marcus replied. Whitman nodded thoughtfully. Investment banking, technology, and strategic consulting? He inquired. Marcus calmly replied, Reynolds Technologies. Recognition lit up Whitman's eyes. You're Marcus Reynolds, he exclaimed, lowering his voice. The company that led the digital transformation for half of the Fortune 500 companies, among other projects, Marcus admitted. Whitman's expression shifted from modest to a mix of amusement and admiration. Something tells me Captain Hoffman has made a monumental tactical error today. But before Marcus could say anything, the plane landed on the Denver runway with a violent jolt and the engines roared as they decelerated. The post-landing announcements came quickly, but with a noticeable deviation from the usual protocol. Instead of thanking the passengers for choosing Elite Airways, Captain Hoffman, visibly irritated, ordered them to remain in their seats until further notice, citing safety procedures that needed to be followed. Marcus's phone vibrated with an incoming call from a direct line reserved for most senior executives in critical situations. Jessica's voice echoed. But what would be the message that would change the course of his day? Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the cockpit doors of an airplane? Captain Hoffman, what's the situation here? Claire asked. Captain, that passenger in seat 2A is causing a disturbance, Claire replied, causing discomfort among the other passengers. Captain Hoffman, what exactly is happening? Claire insisted. He's bitterly complaining about the food and making baseless accusations. Passengers have expressed concern about Michael, turning what was pleasant into tense. Captain Hoffman, confrontational in nature, warned that any person. She's someone who breaks safety rules. Although the protocols don't specify it clearly, her attitude is disruptive. She's one of those people who always demand special treatment and play the race card, Claire commented. We can't allow interruptions in the cockpit, so I'll talk to him, Claire. Maybe we should divert him and remove him from the plane, suggested the captain. We can put him on the air exclusion list to avoid problems for future captains, added Hoffman. Let me handle this, and if he doesn't cooperate, that's exactly what we'll do. Marcus closed the transcript with a mix of vindication and exhaustion. The conversation revealed blatant prejudice that confirmed what he already suspected, but seeing it documented so clearly hit him like an unexpected blow. It wasn't just bad service or a misunderstanding, it was deliberate and coordinated discrimination among several crew members, including the captain himself. Mr. Whitman leaned slightly towards Marcus, he couldn't help but notice. Marcus, are you there? Diane's clear voice broke the silence. Yes, I'm fine, Marcus replied in a calm tone, unconcerned about being heard. What's the situation on the ground? Diane and the team are in position. Airport security at the boarding gate has been informed that it's a domestic flight. Although there's no clear threat, they have decided to withdraw and let our people take control. The legal department has. He reviewed the surveillance footage and the evidence is conclusive. The board has been fully briefed. The president has called for an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, but has already given you the green light to take any necessary action in the meantime. His exact words were, clean house if necessary. Marcus nodded to himself, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. What began as a personal affront had turned into a pivotal moment that would define the culture of the entire organization. An organization that had relied on his silent investment and, by extension, his tacit approval of its practices. The implications went beyond this flight, this crew, or even this airline. It was a crossroads in the way corporations faced the persistent reality of discrimination in spaces where it was not supposed to exist. The plane came to a complete stop at the gate, but instead of the usual bustle of disembarkation, the cabin remained in tense silence. What would happen next? The tension that had been building up over the past hour began to dissipate, replaced by a buzz of whispered conversations as passengers processed what they had witnessed. Several reached for their phones, preparing social media posts that would take the story far beyond this plane. Diane approached Marcus, lowering her voice to maintain a certain semblance. In the crowded cabin, there was a sense of privacy. Mr. Reynolds, I can't begin to express how deeply sorry we are for what happened today. This is a total failure on multiple levels, and I assure you it will be fully addressed. Marcus nodded, appreciating her professionalism while realizing that this moment called for more than just corporate damage control. Thank you, Diane. I know this doesn't represent the company's values, at least not the values we aspire to have. Clearly, there are systemic issues that need to be addressed without delay. Diane, with a serious expression, agreed. The replacement crew will be on board shortly and will complete the flight to San Francisco. Is there anything we can do to make this right for you? Marcus considered the question, observing the passengers who were following the exchange with focused attention. Some seemed understanding, others uncomfortable, and some openly resentful of the delay. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of events. That transcended borders. His personal experience revealed the profound impact of collective discrimination, even when it affects just one person. Yes, there is, he responded with a calm but firm voice, but I would like to address all passengers once the new crew is in place. This disruption has impacted everyone on this flight and they deserve an explanation. Diane nodded, understanding the implications of his request. Of course. The substitute captain and the crew should be arriving in 10 minutes. I'll make arrangements for you to use the intercom system. Diane walked away to coordinate with the ground staff. Marcus's phone buzzed with another urgent message from Jessica's board president. The media is already spreading rumors about Elite Airways flight diversion due to discrimination. How do you want to handle this? Marcus quickly replied, I'll call the president once we're back in the air. As for the media, no comments until I've addressed the passengers and we've gathered all the facts. It's crucial to prepare a statement highlighting our commitment to addressing the incident with full transparency and vigor. This is not just about damage control, it's an opportunity for transformative change. He had barely sent the message when another notification appeared, a news alert that, with a clear and authoritative voice, lacking the defensive advantage that Captain Hoffman's operators used to have, came. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Captain Sarah Lindstrom. I know today's flight has faced unexpected challenges. My team and I will take control from this moment and we expect to be en route to San Francisco in 20 minutes. We appreciate your patience and understanding during this transition. The announcement was met with scattered applause from the passengers, who felt relieved knowing that they would soon resume their journey. They began their journey. Captain Lindstrom walked through the first-class cabin and briefly stopped by Marcus's seat to introduce herself properly. Mr. Reynolds, she said as she firmly shook his hand with determination, I want to personally assure you that my crew and I are committed to providing exceptional service to all our passengers, without exceptions. I understand you will be heading to the cockpit before we depart. Marcus nodded, appreciating her direct approach. Yes, with your permission. I believe passengers deserve to understand why their travel plans were disrupted today. I completely agree, she replied. Just let me know when you're ready. As Captain Lindstrom continued down the cabin, Diane returned to Marcus's side with a clipboard full of documents. These are the preliminary incident reports based on surveillance footage and witness statements we've already gathered. But what he was about to discover in those documents would change the course of events. What do you really expect from a flight delay? This compensation goes beyond mere inconvenience. Marcus continued as the applause faded, this is recognition. Discrimination is not selective. It affects everyone, even those who do not appear to be direct targets of prejudice. When we allow injustice to thrive unopposed, we become complicit in an environment that tolerates it. Marcus handed the intercom to Diane, who stepped forward to offer practical details on how the compensation would work. As she spoke, Marcus returned to his seat, suddenly aware of the emotional cost he had paid. The adrenaline that had sustained him during the intense exchanges was beginning to fade, leaving a familiar fatigue. It was the price of defending a territory that should never have needed defending. Passengers from both cabins approached his seat, forming a line that snaked down the aisle. Some just wanted to shake his hand, others wished to share their own experiences with discrimination, and many expressed admiration for how he had handled the situation. A young woman from economy class leaned in to whisper, "Thank you for not letting it slide. Not all of us have the luxury to fight back like that." Her words resonated deeply with Marcus, highlighting the privilege that had allowed him to act. Shadows stirred beneath the surface. There was no satisfaction in seeing these individuals face the consequences, only a weary acknowledgement that accountability was an essential part of the surveillance system he had defended. It had been designed primarily to enhance safety and improve service quality. His role in documenting discrimination had been a resource he hoped to never have to use. Captain Hoffman turned to Marcus, and his professional facade fell. The captain's composure cracked under the pressure of public humiliation. "You planned this, didn't you? You didn't come on my plane looking for trouble to provoke my crew into making a mistake?" accused Captain Hoffman. Marcus replied calmly, "I boarded this flight with the same expectations as any other passenger, to receive the service I paid for and to be treated with basic dignity. The only thing I planned was a business trip to San Francisco. Everything that followed was the result of the decisions you and your crew made." The captain's jaw worked silently, searching for a response that wouldn't further incriminate him. Finding none, he turned abruptly and headed towards the exit with a stiff posture, in a final attempt to preserve what little dignity he had left. Michael followed reluctantly, casting a venomous glance at Marcus as they passed by. The disgraced crew members disappeared down the gangway, and a collective sigh filled the air. But what they discovered upon reaching the airport changed everything. What if I told you that a routine flight could turn into an unexpected battle for privacy and security? Claire couldn't believe it. "This is absurd, we haven't done anything wrong," she insisted. The troublesome passenger was causing chaos, and the captain's decision to divert the flight was to protect everyone. However, the reality was more complicated. The officer's expression remained impassive as he held his tablet, showing unveiled undeniable surveillance footage. "Miss Wilson, we have complete audio and video documentation of every interaction on this flight, including your conversations behind the galley curtain. I suggest you comply with this directive without further incidents, which would only worsen your current situation." Claire's face paled as she grasped the magnitude of what she was facing. Her gaze shifted to Marcus and then to the ceiling, where the discreet cameras now stood out unmistakably. "They can't do this, it's an invasion of privacy we weren't informed about," Claire protested. Diane responded without hesitation. "Page 17 of your employment contract and page 4 of the flight attendant manual clearly state that all premium cabins are subject to monitoring for quality control and safety. This policy was implemented 3 months ago, and all crew members were notified through multiple channels, including the mandatory training sessions you signed off on." Marcus watched the exchange with an outward calm that concealed a whirlwind of emotions. But what he would discover next would forever change his perspective. Have you ever wondered what happens when a passenger confronts the airplane crew? What Marcus uncovered next left everyone breathless. The passengers who witnessed the events firsthand showed expressions of astonishment, while after others in economy class listened to the details with disbelief. When I questioned this treatment, the crew described me as disturbing and aggressive, finally convincing Captain Hoffman to divert the flight to Denver. Not out of genuine safety concern, but as an attempt to remove me from the flight. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the cabin as passengers processed this revelation. Marcus maintained a calm and dignified tone. What the crew did not know was that I was not only a passenger, but also a co-owner of Elite Airways. 3 years ago, I made a significant investment in this airline with the conviction that we could build a company that truly values every customer, regardless of their appearance or background. As part of that commitment, I implemented a surveillance system in all premium cabins to monitor service quality and ensure the highest standards for each passenger. This revelation had a palpable impact. Passengers exchanged looks of surprise and understanding as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. In economy class, several passengers stood up from their seats to better hear Marcus's words, while the flight attendants remained motionless in the aisles, absorbing the implications of his statement. The revelation that the surveillance system, the digital age, has transformed everything, even at 30,000 feet. After accusations of discrimination, an elite Airways flight became the center of attention when it unexpectedly landed in San Francisco. What really happened up there? The incident quickly made headlines nationwide. Mr. Whitman, thoughtful, leaned back in his seat and murmured in surprise, "What an unexpected turn. For 20 years I've flown with this airline and never imagined witnessing something like this," commented Marcus, the co-owner. He smiled slightly, appreciating the wisdom of the older man, a silent observer. If you want to understand the airline as an ordinary passenger, you gain insights that reports and surveys can't offer. Whitman nodded, acknowledging Marcus's shrewdness. "Although I imagine today's revelations weren't what you expected," he added with a thoughtful expression. Marcus agreed, although perhaps they were necessary. Some problems remain hidden until you experience them up close. The dialogue was abruptly interrupted when the cockpit door opened. The replacement crew boarded the plane, led by the new captain, a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and an air of professionalism honed by experience. She addressed the intercom system, her voice resonating with authority in the cabin. But what she said next left everyone astonished. Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of injustice that you simply can't ignore? That's what Marcus was about to face. On his journey to San Francisco, they explained that they would conduct more thorough interviews once they arrived, but they wanted him to review the initial documentation. Marcus examined the reports with meticulous attention, noting every clinical detail. The precision with which the discriminatory comments and actions had been documented was staggering. The evidence was overwhelming and clear, stripped of the emotional context that had made the experience so dehumanizing. On paper, reduced to timestamps and transcribed dialogues, the incident seemed almost trivial, a routine case of prejudice documented with ruthless corporate efficiency. But Marcus knew he had felt the weight of those disdainful looks, had endured the humiliation of being served spoiled food while others enjoyed gourmet dinners, and had borne the accusations of being problematic when all he had demanded was basic dignity. These were the realities that reports could never fully capture, lived experiences that policies alone could never replace. As the crew finalized preparations and passengers settled into their seats, Marcus stood up and walked to the front of the cabin. There, Diane awaited him with the intercom in hand. It was time to turn an individual injustice into a catalyst for change, not only to address what had happened on this flight, but what occurred daily in so many in other places. But what Marcus was about to do could change everything. Security cameras captured every moment of the day, from the initial discriminatory treatment to the blatant comments made behind the kitchen curtain about the captain's decision to declare an emergency landing based on false information. These images have already been reviewed by our legal and human resources teams, resulting in the immediate dismissal of the crew member responsible. Marcus shifted his focus, his expression softening as he addressed the collective impact of the incident. "I know everyone has felt uncomfortable by this detour. Your time is valuable, and this delay has disrupted your plans and schedules. That's why I sincerely apologize," he said, taking a conscious breath, aware that what he would say next would change the mood of the whole plane. To acknowledge this inconvenience and demonstrate our commitment to addressing the incident properly, Elite Airways will offer a full refund of today's ticket price to each passenger on this flight, along with $10,000 in compensation and 5 years of free elite status upgrades. A hush of astonishment filled the cabin, quickly giving way to exclamations of surprise and scattered applause, which soon turned into a sustained ovation from the economy class passengers. Those who had been frustrated moments before, checking connecting flight schedules, now looked ahead with anticipation. Credulity in the face of the generous compensation, far exceeding any expectations. In a world where justice is often compromised, how would you respond when faced with blatant discrimination? On a plane soaring through the skies, The passengers of the flight found themselves united by a story that defies the ordinary. The cabin fell into a reverent silence, all eyes fixed on Marcus, a man whose serene dignity had defied discrimination and led them to this unprecedented moment. Block 6, Landing and Revelation for First-Class Justice, ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Reynolds' voice echoed through the intercom. I am Marcus Reynolds, and I am here to talk about what happened today and why your journey was interrupted. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone listened intently, united by the intrigue of a drama that had resulted in an unexpected landing. Some of you witnessed the interactions in first class that led to this diversion. What started as a simple request for the meal I had ordered turned into something much more serious when I was deliberately served spoiled food and subjected to discriminatory treatment based on my race. Marcus paused, observing the emotions unfolding around him, seeing nods of confirmation on the faces of those who understood the gravity of the moment. But what he discovered next left him speechless. Brief pause. Why do some people prefer to remain silent when others are forced to speak? Marcus's privileged position and resources granted him an influence that many envied, a truth that underscored his duty to use that advantage for structural change rather than personal vindication. As the last passengers resumed their seats and the plane prepared for takeoff, Mr. Whitman leaned back next to Marcus with a deeply thoughtful expression. That was a powerful statement you made there, both with words and actions, Marcus, he remarked. Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the window as the Denver landscape faded beneath them. Some lessons must be costly to be remembered, he said. $10,000 per passenger is more than costly, Whitman observed. That's a corporate message if I ever saw one. Marcus replied quietly, the money is not what matters. What matters is that everyone on this plane now has a stake in this story, not just as witnesses, but as participants. They will remember this flight not for the discrimination they witnessed, but for the responsibility that came after. Whitman absorbed this, nodding slowly. You're playing the long game, beyond just addressing an incident. Marcus reflected as he watched the clouds enveloping the plane as it reached its cruising altitude. Because this will never be just about one flight or one moment. It's about changing the narrative, rewriting the script for all those who come after. It was not just about a flight, a crew, or an airline, it was about challenging the assumption that. But what they would discover next would change everything forever. Have you ever felt like certain places are not made for someone like you? That sense of exclusion can be devastating. Just as the plane stabilized and the impeccable replacement crew resumed cabin service, Marcus turned on his tablet. He had a crucial task ahead. Preparing the presentation he had to deliver to the board the next day. The surveillance images revealed compelling evidence of individual misconduct, but his real challenge was to unmask the deeper patterns that allowed this behavior to spread unchecked. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. It was a call from the board president, Robert Chen. Marcus answered, ready for the tough conversation that lay ahead. Robert Chen was straightforward. I've just reviewed the preliminary reports, and the images are, to put it mildly, unsettling. Marcus, keeping his voice low despite the cabin noise, replied, the financial impact of offering compensation will be significant, but the board will have questions. Marcus had already anticipated this concern. Allowing this culture to persist would have a much greater long-term cost. Loss of customers, lawsuits, damage to reputation. Consider this an investment in the company's future, not an expense, he added. He nodded firmly. There was a brief silence as Chen processed this new perspective. He knew that Marcus was not someone who made decisions lightly. But what Marcus was about to propose would change the course of the company in a way that no one expected. The flight went smoothly, with the replacement crew offering exceptional service, just as Marcus had always dreamed for Elite Airways. Professional, attentive, and, most crucially, consistent for every passenger, regardless of their appearance. But what was about to happen in San Francisco would change everything. During the descent towards San Francisco, Marcus finalized his notes for the board presentation. He knew that the next day would be crucial, not only for his role in the company, but for the company's future itself. And what he found upon landing left him breathless. The Elite Airways response team awaited Marcus upon his arrival. The seriousness of the situation was reflected in their faces. James Peterson, the director of operations, stepped forward quickly. Marcus reviewed the footage, and what he saw was inexcusable, said James. extending his hand with determination. "Indeed," replied Marcus firmly, "and now we must ensure that this never happens again. The president has called for an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. The story is already spreading across all platforms. In the executive terminal, analysts had established a command center overflowing with customer feedback data. A young data scientist pointed to a screen revealing. Have you ever wondered what happens behind the scenes when a scandal erupts at an airline? Whatever unfolds after this incident will be front-page news come morning. That's why our response must be equally captivating." Marcus explained that he's preparing a comprehensive proposal for fundamental reforms throughout the airline. New training protocols, accountability mechanisms, and revised hiring practices. This proposal will be presented to the board of directors tomorrow morning. Some members, like Chen, may push back. They may argue that this is an isolated incident, not a systemic issue. But then, Marcus will present the data. 17 formal complaints from minority first-class passengers in the past year, most dismissed without proper investigation. This is not an isolated case, it's a clear pattern. Chen sighed, a sound reflecting acceptance of the magnitude of the challenge they face. "You have my support, Marcus. This is not only the morally right thing to do, it's the smart business decision. See you at the emergency board meeting tomorrow." As Marcus ended the call, he noticed several passengers around him checking their banking apps, exclaiming in astonishment as they saw the promised compensation. The process was already underway. Diane had acted swiftly, ensuring that the corporate response matched the urgency of the situation. And so, the promising beginning of a change became evident. "The board will likely have questions. They might question the cost of addressing this incident," Marcus said, "or they may consider the much higher price of ignoring it." Marcus stepped aside to make a call. "Jessica, in New York, the images have been fully backed up, just as you requested." "Confirmed copies," assured Jessica, "with a triple layer of security on our servers, the legal team, and your private cloud. They can't disappear, and that's crucial because tomorrow is when the real work begins. Today is about addressing an incident, but tomorrow is about changing an entire system." A message from Robert Chen appeared on Marcus's phone. Media requests were pouring in. "They want statements, interviews. How do you wish to proceed?" "No interviews yet," Marcus decided after pondering. "Let's issue a statement acknowledging the incident, confirming that immediate actions were taken, and announcing deep reforms that will be unveiled tomorrow. Keep the focus on systemic change, not on personal drama." A middle-aged African-American executive approached Marcus and whispered, "I've been with this airline for 20 years. What happened to you has happened to many others who couldn't defend themselves. Thank you for using your position to force this conversation." "This is not just my fight," Marcus replied, looking at her intently, "and the changes we make cannot be limited to protecting first-class executives." She nodded, "But the board won't make it easy, some will try to downplay it." But what happened next was unexpected. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie behind customer satisfaction metrics? We have uncovered a disturbing disparity in satisfaction ratings between white passengers and passengers of color in premium cabins. This was evident in several graphs, especially on routes served by certain crew rotations. But what we unearthed next left everyone stunned. Marcus questioned Diane and moved forward with determination. Few of our systems categorized complaints as isolated incidents unless multiple reports pointed to the same employee in a short period of time. Perhaps, Marcus suggested with intent, they were designed precisely not to detect those patterns. James frowned at the sharp observation. "The system you implemented has revealed discrepancies that we could not or did not want to see before." Marcus challenged the systems that reflected James's priorities, and our priority now must be accountability, not just damage control. That's why I have already launched a thorough audit of all discrimination complaints received in the past. For 5 years, Diane intervened, even those initially dismissed. Suddenly, a notification popped up on the main screen. In it, Claire and Captain Hoffman claimed it was all a misunderstanding and suggested that Marcus had used his position for revenge. As the chief advisor approached with a tablet in hand, a surprising headline was revealed. The compensation package amounted to $10 million. Have you ever wondered how a decision can completely transform a company? The commitment to radical reform advances as the boardroom empties. Diane approached Marcus with the first implementation schedule already outlined on her tablet. "We can start the training program next week," she said. "However, expanding the surveillance system will require more time, around 3 months to cover the entire fleet." Marcus nodded, understanding the magnitude of the challenge. "The Discrimination Complaints Review Committee has already identified potential members diverse in terms of demographics and roles within the company," Diane continued. "We'll need your final approval, obviously." Marcus smiled slightly, admiring her initiative. "Share the list with me tonight," he replied. "I want people who understand what's at stake, not just for the company, but for every passenger who entrusts their journey to us." The first-class cabin of Elite Airways shone under the morning light, while after Marcus settled into seat 2A, the same one he had occupied during that fateful flight 6 months ago. The transformation was not only reflected in the newly renovated interior, but in the subtle yet significant changes in the service culture that had been established throughout the airline. Sarah Johnson, now the permanent head flight attendant on the premium route from New York to San Francisco, approached with a warm smile, devoid of the artificial air that usually characterized first-class service. "Good morning, Mr." The unfounded accusations of Captain Hoffman and the explicit racist comments overheard behind the galley curtain, "Gentlemen and ladies." Marcus spoke with a determined voice as he observed the reactions of the board members. What we witnessed was not an isolated incident, but a manifestation of deep-rooted cultural issues within our organization. The audit has identified 78 similar complaints that were dismissed without proper investigation in the last 3 years. Charles Whitfield, a veteran in the industry with 30 years of experience and a board member, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. While he acknowledged that the behavior was unforgivable, he questioned whether the $10 million compensation package was excessive. "We're talking about poor service, not physical harm," he remarked. "It wasn't just poor service," Marcus replied firmly. "It was discrimination. A deliberate decision that resulted in an unnecessary deviation of the flight, affecting each passenger. The compensation not only acknowledges the inconveniences, but also our commitment to significant change. This comprehensive package of reforms we are proposing," he said as Victoria Hayes, another board member, pointed to the bulky folders distributed before the meeting, "will have implementation costs amounting to millions. Consider the alternative." Marcus replied, "Class action lawsuits and government investigations will hold our organization's reputation at stake." But what he discovered next left him speechless. If we ignore the damage instead of facing it, how will we change the future? We have to make the evidence impossible to ignore, Marcus. Tomorrow is not just about a flight or a crew. It's about unveiling a truth that has been hidden in plain sight for too long. As the response team continued with their preparations, Marcus surveyed the command center. The screens displayed reactions on social media, media coverage, and internal data. This incident had forced a long overdue reckoning, but it was alarming that such extreme circumstances were needed to prompt action. It evidenced how deeply rooted the problems were. Marcus raised his voice from the other end of the room. "I want to see the complete service records of each member of the crew." The boardroom of Elite Airways fell silent as Marcus concluded his presentation. The evidence of systemic discrimination unfolded before the gathered executives, while surveillance footage from the flight played one last time on Claire's main screen. However, due to a misunderstanding, their efforts crumbled when thorough surveillance revealed the unthinkable. During the arbitration hearings, footage was leaked showing explicit racist remarks overheard behind the galley. The combination of this evidence with intentionally serving spoiled food left no room for a convincing denial. 3 employees were permanently dismissed from Elite Airways, with the incident recorded in their work histories. But the consequences did not stop there. The Federal Aviation Administration had launched its own investigation into Captain Hoffman's decision to divert the plane without clear justification. He feared his commercial pilot license might be suspended for 6 months. Furthermore, the incident was incorporated into the company's training programs. Airlines across the country served as a case study on how bias could compromise flight safety and operational decisions. Claire Wilson tried to give interviews to portray herself as a victim of cancel culture, but found little sympathy, even among the usually more receptive media, once the surveillance footage went public. The last thing Marcus heard was that Claire worked for a regional airline, relegated to budget routes for short distances and subject to increased supervision. However, the most significant outcome was not the punitive measures. Are we on the brink of a customer service revolution? With smartphones in the hands of all our passengers, an incident can not only reach our boardroom, but go viral globally within hours. Robert Chen nodded, acknowledging the truth in Marcus's words. We have the opportunity to lead this change proactively or be dragged into it under unfavorable conditions. The debate lasted nearly 3 hours. Some board members resisted accepting the systemic nature of the problem, while others advocated for even more radical reforms. Marcus, firm and determined, kept returning to concrete data. He didn't allow the discussion to get lost in assumptions or baseless defenses. It's not about pointing fingers, he emphasized as the conversation reached its climax, but about addressing the root of the issue. Integrating responsibility into our system so that every passenger receives the treatment and respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance or background. In the end, the vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 11-3 in favor of adopting the complete package of reforms. The dissenters expressed their concerns about the costs and implementation challenges, but admitted that the status quo had become unsustainable. We will issue a public statement this afternoon, Robert proclaimed at the end of the meeting, ensuring total transparency about the events and actions we have decided to take. But what will happen next could transform everything. Can you imagine being recognized as a pioneer in changing an entire industry? That's how Reynolds felt as he settled into his seat, with his pre-booked Macallan 18 and special meal already secured. Can I offer you anything else before takeoff? He asked politely. Just the usual hot towel, thank you, Marcus replied, returning the smile as he admired how Sarah's professionalism and warm attention genuinely extended to every passenger, regardless of their appearance or background. As Sarah made her way through the cabin, she discreetly left a personal envelope on Marcus's tray. Intrigued, Marcus found a handwritten note inside, signed by each member of the flight crew. Mr. Reynolds, your courage 6 months ago not only transformed our airline, but also the entire industry. Stripe. What began as a painful confrontation has turned into a model of change that airlines across the country now follow. We are proud to serve on a plane where every passenger receives truly first-class treatment. Thank you for setting this standard. Flight crew of Flight 347. Marcus tucked the note into his jacket pocket, briefly remembering the repercussions for the original crew. Claire Wilson, Michael Barton, and Captain Hoffman did not leave quietly as expected. They fought their dismissals through their union representatives, claiming they were being made scapegoats. But what happened next was even more surprising. Respect resonated among every passenger, regardless of their appearance. The crew rummaged through their pockets as the plane gained speed on the runway. This incident was not about a simple meal, a flight diversion, or a crew bias. It was about the profound principle that spaces created for all should truly welcome everyone. Recognizing that genuine change demands not only addressing isolated incidents but transforming the systems that allow them. As the plane soared into the clouds, Marcus briefly closed his eyes and experienced something that had eluded him on too many previous journeys. The simple delight of being treated not as an exception or intruder, but as a genuinely welcomed passenger, with no conditions or restrictions. Restrictions. I hope this story has captivated you. Share it with your friends and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale. In the meantime, I've selected 2 stories that I think you'll enjoy. Have an extraordinary day. The reforms that drove the comprehensive training program for elite airlines were so successful that 3 other major companies adopted them. The Diverse Review Committee for Discrimination Complaints proved to be so effective that it was expanded to address other passenger service issues. The new surveillance system, present in both premium and economy cabins, not only deters incidents but also documents any event, ensuring that future problems are not dismissed as mere misunderstandings. As the plane began to taxi towards the runway, Marcus turned on his tablet to analyze the quarterly performance reports. Elite Airways premium bookings had increased against all odds, despite industry analysts predicting that the scandal would damage the brand. The transparency with which the company addressed discrimination and its commitment to reform resonated deeply with travelers, tired of empty corporate apologies. Captain Lisa Hernandez's voice echoed through the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard Flight 347 bound for San Francisco. 6 months ago, Marcus boarded a plane where he was seen as an intruder and in a space not meant for people like him. Today, he was flying on a transformed airline, not perfect, but actively striving to create an environment where dignity was paramount. What would come next, however, would be even more surprising.